There are guests on the Elias Macko Show, and then there are guests on the Elias Macko Show. Irwin Cotler joins us right now, and boy, as I read you his title here, there's a lot to get to. Right now, he's founder and international chair of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, and of course, he's a former Canadian MP, Minister of Justice, and Attorney General of Canada, and he was also Canada's first special envoy on preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism. And with good reason, we have him on the air today. First things first, Mr. Cotler, welcome back to the program.
Good speaking with you.
I took great interest into a piece that you co-wrote at the beginning of this month in the National Post. And it was calling for a bit of a rethink in Canada on how we deal with the Israel-Palestinian conflict. And it was in the aftermath of that vote, right? I think our listeners will remember there was a vote, the NDP and the Liberals, last-minute backdoor deals to pass a motion that made a lot of people unhappy. We saw what happened with Anthony Housefather, who almost quit the Liberal Party over the whole thing. And then I read your piece in the National Post. Mr. Cotler, why'd you pen the piece? Why was it so important for you to weigh in on the issue?
Well, I thought that the whole process was seriously flawed from a procedural parliamentary point of view, and also substantively flawed. Procedurally flawed because it was done at the last minute. In fact, amendments were proposed by the government, which in fact had not even been debated within the government caucus. And it's the kind of thing where the resolution itself should have been opposed, and the government should have brought forth its own resolution with regard to foreign policy in the Middle East, not being reactive to an opposition motion, which it rejected its substantial features, and as I said, was procedurally flawed in the way it was amended, and even when amended, still did not deal with the essential issues. So we wrote that op-ed in the National Post to suggest a comprehensive approach to Canadian foreign policy decision-making, which would invite a global perspective, a regional perspective, a two-state for two peoples approach based on the mutual acknowledgement of each other's legitimacy, and that would engage a discourse and debate in Canada about how that future can be developed.
So, this is your old party, the Liberal Party. That's your old party, and it seems like you're unhappy with how they handled the whole affair. What do you think? What do you think is happening inside the Liberal Party with Justin Trudeau, with the Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly, where they handle it in this way that you're displeased about?
Well, I'm, not an engaged member of the Liberal Party in that sense. I'm now, working mainly in a human rights approach as head of a human rights NGO. And it was from that perspective that I critiqued the resolution. As I said, as a former parliamentarian, I thought it was procedurally flawed in the way it engaged or, in fact, disengaged parliamentarians. And substantively, we need more with regard to an approach to the Middle East than a reactive response to an opposition party's motion, which cobbled together a set of amendments at the last minute, and the resolution wasn't even translated into French. It was done so quickly. So to me, this was not the way to make foreign policy, as I said, either procedurally or substantively.
So I wonder if what you're asking for may be impossible. Okay, and so you were the first special envoy on preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that the role that Deborah Lyons is currently in right now?
Yes.
Okay.
Deborah Lyons has that role. I strongly recommended her for that role. It took me over a year to persuade her to do it, but she's the right person in the right place at the right time. So I'm delighted that she's there. And from everything that I'm able to appreciate, she's doing a first-rate job.
Okay, but this leads me to why I think what you're asking for might be impossible. Because I have no doubt that Deborah Lyons is doing a good job. I'll take your word for it. But then I look, so in this country, we have Deborah Lyons in her role on combating anti-Semitism. We have Amira El-Gawabi. She's got the role to combat Islamophobia. And by my count, Irwin, if I can call you Irwin, by my count, since October 7th, I've seen them together twice. They did one interview with Vashi Kapelos, And then last week, they did a photo op with the Governor General. I have not seen them together since or before, just 2 times in 6 months. And if those two can't be together, holding hands, coming up with common front, Canadian values, if those two can't do it, how is anyone else going to be expected to do it?
Well, I think there are certain things on which we can agree. I think, since October 7th, what we've had was not only in October 7th, the worst day in Jewish history since the Holocaust, as has been said many times, horrors too terrible to be believed, but not too terrible to have happened. And these mass atrocities on October 7th were perpetrated not just by an organization, Hamas, which is a terrorist organization under a Canadian, American, European law and the like, but under a genocidal, anti-Semitic terrorist organization, not because I say so, but because they say so. One would have thought, therefore, that the mass atrocities would have resulted in the combating of anti-Semitism, in a consensus that we need to make this a priority. However, what's happened is that it's resulted in an explosion of anti-Semitism. So we're seeing a situation today where anti-Semitism is not only threatening, in my view, to Jews, but it's threatening really being toxic to democracy. It's an assault on our common humanity. It is, in a word, as has been said many times, the canary in the mineshaft of global evil. So we've learned painfully and too well, while it begins with Jews, it doesn't end with. So one would hope that the 2 special envoys can work together on common cause on which something is actually threatening, as I say, to Canadians' national security. I don't have to remind you about the mass protests that are taking place. I'm not talking about protests in favor of 2 states or protests in favor of Palestinian rights. I've been in support of that too. I'm talking about protests in favor of Hamas. And those really are effectively supportive of what is a public position by Hamas calling for the destruction of Israel and the killing of Jews wherever they may be. On that, both envoys should be able to come together in common cause.
Do you think they have? Because I saw Amir El-Gawabi's statement on what happened over the weekend. It didn't seem to be the condemnation that you just put together so eloquently. It seemed to say, oh, this is there's only a couple of people. This is very isolated. What are your thoughts on how she handled that?
Well, it's not isolated, and regrettably, one of the findings that I had before October 7th and just before I concluded my mandate, the most disturbing finding I had was that anti-Semitism was increasingly becoming normalized, legitimated, accepted in the political culture, the popular, the entertainment, the sports, and in particular, the campus culture. That was before October 7th. As I said, it's been exploding since October 7th. There's no excuses at this point for not coming together in common cause. I'm not saying also that we don't have concerns with regard to Islamophobia, and those have to be addressed as matters of, as all forms of hate and discrimination have to be addressed. But what we're seeing now in the neighborhoods and in the streets, in the campuses and in communities, what we're seeing are public calls with respect to the destruction of Israel and the like. That has to be unacceptable to any Canadian. And that has to be seen, as I said, as a threat to our national security and toxic to our democracies. On that, we have to come together.
Your thoughts on how the Prime Minister has handled all this? Because everything you just said, I look to the Prime Minister for leadership on that front. So your thoughts on how he's handled it?
Well, I've had discussions with the Prime Minister on this, and his position has been on this point. I understand. He said, look, my responsibility in Canada is to unite Canadians. I'm listening to both sides, and I'm seeking to bring both sides together. And as I said to him, what you have to guard against is that the 2 sides don't end up being on the wrong side of history, and that the responsibility of the Prime Minister, of the government of the day, is to be on the right side of history. On this issue, with respect to the ravaging anti-Semitism, there are no 2 sides. And I would hope and expect that the government will make this a priority at this point, because in doing so, they will be protecting our democracy and protecting our national security.
Mr. Cotler, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Not at all. Good speaking with you.
That's Irwin Cotler, founder and international chair of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human